taking old wood and turning it into a cool top or something pretty cool that it looks like to some people that may be considered junk or firewood. That is, to me, a pretty rewarding little benefit of woodworking. This honestly is one of my favorite things to do, working in the shop, is taking an old board that looks like it has no value and turning it into a cool top. That thing is bowed, it's twisted, it's crooked. We're gonna make a top. We're gonna make a nightstand top out of this thing. First thing we're gonna have to do is cut this down into shorter lengths. That's gonna start to minimize that bow. Now we've cut our boards into 20-inch lengths, and by doing that we cut out a lot of that bow. But as you can see, these boards are still not flat. They still got a pretty good wobble to them. So the next step, what we're going to do is I'm going to sight each board and I'm going to look for the bow in the board. And what I want to do is come over to the joiner and I want the bow side down against the table. So I'm touching at 2 points. So as I push my board over the top of the joiner, it has 2 contact points, so it's not going to want to pivot as I go through. Now we've got this flat plane that we're going to lay flat on the table of the planer, and we're going to feed it through the planer, and the planer is going to give us a nice parallel flat to the plane below. So I'm going to set my planer to about 1.5 and open my blast gate as I run the board through until I hear the cutters touching the wood, and then I'm going to stop. That's how I kind of determine my first height setting as I run the boards through on their first pass. So now I've got a relatively smooth side and a relatively smooth side. I didn't want to take 100% of the character away because that's the whole idea. We've got reclaimed wood that we're trying to make a nice reclaimed little nightstand top. And if I plane it down too far, we're going to lose all that neat checking and the cracks and the character. So I want to leave a little bit, but I also want my boards to be nice and flat. So when I glue them together, we're going to have a nice flat top. I'm going to leave 2 of my edges rough. My 2 outside edges I want to leave rough to just give this top a little more character. And then the inside edges are going to have to be get a second straight edge so it glues up nice together. So right now I'm going to take a measurement and see how wide I am. I'm about 21 inches and I want to be 18. Each board should be about 4.5 inches. We're going to go 4 5/8. We're going to give ourselves just a little bit extra in case we have to make an additional pass. The boards with the rough edges, I'm going to have to run them against the fence. So it's not a perfectly straight edge. So what I think I need to do first is run over to the edge sander with these rough edges and create a straighter edge for me to work with. I don't want to lose the edge entirely. I want it a little bit rough, but I need it straight enough where I'm going to get a nice glue line on my table saw. Smooth it up a little. Now we're ready to rip at the table saw. Here we go. Then I'm checking my joints to make sure they came together nice and tight. If they didn't, I could go back to the joiner or try to rerun them on the table saw. All right, so I'm gonna mark my boards. I'm just gonna draw a little triangle. I always like to lay them out again to make sure everything looks good. Now I'm gonna flip my boards up and glue my edges. Dusty. Looks like I've been doing something. So we're going to go ahead and put a little glue on our edges of our boards. Like I mentioned earlier, taking old wood and turning it into a cool top or something pretty cool that it looks like to some people that may be considered junk or firewood. That is, to me, a pretty rewarding little benefit of woodworking. Then I just line them up when I had them lined up with the table saw. And as I'm clamping them up, I'm watching the squeeze out. I love to see a little squeeze out everywhere to know that I put enough glue on the joints. I want to make sure my boards are sitting flat as I clamp them up. Now we'll probably have to let this sit for an hour and a half before we can get back to it. Give it plenty of time to dry. Pull it out of the clamps. And we're gonna take it over to the planer. And we're gonna run this through and try to keep it as thick as we can, but we wanna take it down till we get it smooth, make it smooth on both sides. We're going to cut it to size. We're going to come over here to the panel saw, and I'm going to square up one end to start, and then I'm going to slide it over and cut it to my finished length. This top's going to be 18 by 18. Then we're going to go over to the table saw, and I'm going to rip it to 18 inches wide. Set my fence to 18. And we're going to use this rough edge. It's pretty straight. It's not perfect, but I want to maintain that. I want to keep that rough edge. So we're going to put the rough edge against the fence and run this guy through. There we go. So now we're ready to orbital sand our top, but the next thing I want to do is take a good look at it and see if I see any defects that we need to address. If we need to do any epoxy work or if we need to fill any holes or anything. Really depends on the type of use that this top is going to get. If it's a dining table or a desk or say a vanity or something, we're going to definitely want to fill just about every hole. So it's really up to what you decide, what you want to do there. This particular top, I do see 2 holes that I'm going to try some little dowels. We're going to just stick them in there, cut them off, sand them flush. Also, I see a little defect here. The end of this, we got a little gap there, a little space there where these 2 boards came together. It's part of a knot or something that broke out. Unfortunately, this is one of the challenges of working with reclaimed or weathered wood. You've got more of these issues to deal with, but I still think it's worth it. So first, I'm going to go ahead and put a little glue in the hole, and that's more glue than we need. Found a little dowel that's about the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to kind of twist this guy in, and we'll cut him off with our little Japanese saw here. And I'm going to do it again. That one went a little further. In my opinion, it's always better to use solid wood versus epoxy if you have that option when you're trying to fill a hole. You can see if some of these others actually, yeah, we're going to go ahead and put a little glue in those too, since we're working on it. Yeah, this last one is a little smaller. Oops. Yeah, we're going to use a hammer and use a little persuasion. That's actually probably the easiest way to do it actually is to cut these into like 2-inch lengths. And you can hammer them down a little bit further, but each of those different dowels should work for us. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and epoxy this edge. What I'm going to do is put some tape on it. I'm going to tape up the bottom a little bit, and I'm going to tape up the side just to keep the epoxy from rolling off the edge of our top there. So we got to mix up our epoxy. We've got a resin and a hardener, and the mix is 1-to-1, and I don't need a lot. So here's my resin. I am guessing a little bit on the mix. I did count to 5 quietly for each pour, to try to estimate keeping that at a 1-to-1 ratio. This particular top, we're going to put a stain on it. So here's that actual stain. I'm going to mix it in, put a few drops in there, and we're going to mix it in with our epoxy. You only need to mix it probably for about 10-15 seconds and it should be good to go. It sets up pretty quick. It's called a 5-minute epoxy, but you need to have it in place. It's going to start setting up before then. I'm just going to drop it into the hole and let gravity do its thing. Usually takes about 15 or 20 minutes for it to dry, maybe 15 to 30 before you can start sanding it or working it, depending on how you mixed it and the temperature and so forth. If it's really warm temperature, it's going to flow more like a liquid than a gel. You know, it should be getting down in there. I'm going to go ahead and put tape over the top, and then I'm going to flip it upside down in hopes that gravity will keep the epoxy at the top. Flip it over. And now we're going to have to let it sit for about 30 minutes. Okay, so here is our finished nightstand top that we've been working on. Grabbed some parts, found some legs, some aprons, and a shelf, and we made a nightstand out of it. So there it is. Remember that crooked board in the beginning that was all bowed? Well, we cut it up and we turned it into a nice top for a nice little nightstand.